Welcome to the Indie Author Showcase. I am your host, Chad Robert Morgan, and this is the, God, let me try that again. Welcome to the Indie Author Showcase, the podcast by indie authors for indie authors. I am your host, Chad Robert Morgan, and let's get into it. First of all, just to reiterate, what is the purpose of this podcast? I say this because we are about 2 weeks away from WonderCon, and that was the genesis. Let me shift my camera and try this again. There, I'm a little more to the side. And you get like a little tripod and lower it. That's right. All right, let's try this again. Welcome to the Indie Author Showcase. I am your... One more time. Welcome to the Indie Author Showcase, the podcast by indie authors for indie authors. I am your host, Chad Robert Morgan, and let's get into it. First of all, let's reiterate the purpose of the podcast, and I want to do this because we are coming up on the anniversary of the podcast inception. We are about 2 weeks away from WonderCon, and WonderCon was really where I got the idea that if there was some mechanism for indie authors to help support each other. So we're at WonderCon, we're at the small press tables. There was a huge section of dozens of indie authors all trying to do the same thing, trying to get people to swing by, stop by, and pick up their book. We were all basically doing the same thing by ourselves. The thought was, what if we worked collectively? So the purpose of the podcast is to give those indie authors a platform to come up here and say, this is my work, come check me out. And also for us to showcase a lot of these great books, because some of these are really good books and deserve to be noticed. The podcast itself tries to be extremely positive. In other words, we don't bring books on here to just give negative reviews. Everything we bring on here is what I consider to be a good book. If we talk about anything in the negative, it's basically just to give context of what to expect from the book, right? This is what I think worked. This is what I think didn't work. But overall, this was a good book. And like, for example, with my book, The Baby Eater, I think it's a good book. It's won 4 awards. But some people might not be comfortable with the idea of a monster that comes into the middle of the night and tries to eat babies. They might not be comfortable with an explicit adult content that starts in the very beginning of the book. So I want the reader to be aware, because that may not be for you. I've had parents come in and says, what's the age range? And they're standing there with a 7-year-old, and I'm like, yeah, no. And that's my purpose of when I discussed a book in the showcase, right? It's not to really give a review. It's not to say it's a 3-star or 5-star. It's just to give you, the reader, context to see if this book is a good fit for you, the reader. That's all. If the book has, like, again, for example, let's look at Playground. That's splatterpunk dealing with kids. It was a really good book, but the subject matter might be off-putting to certain readers, right? Or let's go with Cynthia Diamond's book, Paranormal Romance. Really good book. You may not be in it. Jennifer Milne, exactly the same thing. Excellent book, has won multiple awards, but it is geared for young girls. If you're not a young girl, it might not be your flavor. If you are a young girl, highly recommend the book. So again, that is the purpose of these discussions, right? Not to slam the book, not to point out its flaws, but simply to say, this is what I liked about it, this is what I didn't like about it. Take that information and decide for yourself if this book seems to be a good fit for you. With that said, we're 2 weeks away from WonderCon. I'm really excited. It's going to be busy. I know I have had some personal drama, so I'm kind of like, normally I'm like prepping for weeks and everything like that, and today this time I'm going to be a little bit behind the eight ball here. Um, this time I'm going to be a little bit behind the eight ball here, so I need to hopefully I need to rely on my previous prep to see if I'm already ready. I have ordered some more books. They haven't shown up yet. They got a couple more weeks. Fingers crossed. You never know with these things, I swear. If not, I do have hopefully enough to last me through this con. So, again, fingers crossed. I wanted to talk a little bit today about conflict. I think conflict is an important part of any story, but I think there is some misconception when you talk about conflict. Because when you say conflict, it sounds like, you're duking it out in the ring or something like that. And the thing is when you have a conflict in a story, it doesn't have to be, violence. It doesn't have to be good guy versus bad guy. So let's talk a little bit about what kind of conflict can you bring in your book. And the way I think about it, there's three main types. The first type, let me back up a minute. So conflict basically means you have a goal and something's getting in your way. That's the short of it, right? It doesn't have to be Darth Vader coming in with a lightsaber and trying to kill you. It could be a simple matter of, I need to file this with City Hall, So let's talk a little bit about conflict and what makes for good conflicts. And I think they can kind of get broken down into the three main categories. Again, the conflict is simply something getting in the way of the main character, or any character for that matter, trying to accomplish his goal. The first is another person. You have an adversarial conflict. That doesn't necessarily mean they're enemies. For example, look at A Few Good Men. Okay? Tom Cruise's main goal in that story is to exonerate 2 Marines. Kevin Bacon, on the other hand, his goal is to prosecute them, to find them guilty, to put them to jail. The two are at odds, right? And they are going against each other every step of the way. But they actually like each other, right? There'll be times when they'll sit there and, like, in between court sessions going, yeah, that was actually a good move. And, oh, you got me on that one, kind of thing. They don't take it personally. They don't take it personally. This is their job. And they actually like each other. They're friendly with each other. That in itself could make for a more interesting conflict. Take for another example, I believe the episode was called A Measure of a Man from Star Trek The Next Generation. Lieutenant Commander Data is considered to be property because he's an android. He's not a real flesh and blood person. Picard comes in and says, no, Data is sentient. He has the rights of every other living being. The head law or judge advocate general officer there says, okay, we need to have a trial. Picard will be for the defense and Riker will be on the other side. And Riker says, I don't want to do it. You want me to prove a position I don't believe in. I don't want to do it. I can't do it. And the judge advocate general officer says, well, you ain't got a choice, and then if you try to half-ass this, I'm going to rule in default and Data's property. So Riker already has a conflict set up. He's got to prove his friend is property. So he's got to go against his friend to save his friend. He's got to take the job seriously. And at one point, we see him, he's going through things, and he's like, ooh, this is good. I got him. I'm going to prove it. And then he's like, oh, yeah, that's right. I don't actually want to do this. So, in the end of the story, Picard eventually convinces the Judge Advocate General Officer that Data is, in fact, sentient. And they're having a party, and Riker's not showing up. And Data goes, looks for him. And he says, well, why aren't you celebrating? It's like, I was on the other side of this argument. I tried to prove that you weren't a person. I almost won. I feel horrible. And Data goes, yes, but if you didn't do that, I wouldn't have had a chance. And you took this job on. You didn't have any choice. And you did it at personal expense to yourself. That means you're my friend. And then, Riker smiles and hey, everything, and then they walk off together. It is a little bit of a kind of a bow to put on the thing, but again, television. The point being is that the conflict had some layers to it and some extra stakes. We'll talk about stakes in a bit. Because it not only put Data's sentiency, Data's status as a character in jeopardy, but Riker's personal feelings were also put in jeopardy. So again, conflict between two rivals doesn't have to be, they don't have to be angry with each other, they don't have to be physical with each other. It's just character A has a goal, character B is getting in the way. And like I said, you can make that really interesting by not making them enemies, by not making them adversarial, that they don't have a choice. And how does that balance back and forth? Maybe the adversarial character has some inside information that could help him achieve his goal, but to do that, he's got to betray the main character. And so now he's balancing that, or vice versa. Maybe the main character is like, I can achieve the goal, but I might have to burn this friendship, and start balancing that. And that actually makes for another conflict right there. Achieving the goal, because you have two goals that are competing. So which one can you achieve both of them? The second kind of conflict is the environment. And for a good example of this, let's look at Andy Weir's The Martian. So we have Matt Damon's character is stranded on Mars. And the first conflict he's got is surviving on a hostile planet. Mars does not support life as we know it. He doesn't have air, he doesn't have food, he doesn't have water, or at least he does in very extremely limited amounts, and he's going to burn up what he has real quick. So he needs to come up with ways to survive on a non-Earth planet. That's conflict number one. Conflict number two is when he finally lets Earth know that he's still alive. Earth has to figure out how to get him back. Earth has to figure out how to keep him alive until they get him back. And the big conflict there is astrophysics. Mars is really far away. Okay, this is taking place more or less in the modern world. You can't just, get in a shuttle and warp drive over there, or, get in the Millennium Falcon and hyperspace over there. You have to wait for the planets to get in line to make the trip as short as possible. You have to line up your launch vectors. It takes months to get to Mars under best conditions. There is a lot of economic and political pressures because, again, it's not Star Trek. You can't just steal a shuttle and zoop. It takes a lot of rocket fuel. It takes, the rockets are expensive. All this stuff is in the calculus. So the big conflict in The Martian is reality, it's the environment. It's the environment of Mars and it's the environment of space. Lastly, I think the third main category of conflict is the characters themselves. You often see this in romance books where characters are kind of getting in their own way. You know, I really want to ask this girl out, but I'm too shy. Can I get over my shyness? You see a lot in horror, right? Person fighting their own demons. We see this. Let's see. I had a good example of this. I can't remember what it was. One example of this is in the Cormoran Strike books by Robert Galbraith, which is basically J.K. Rowling under another name. We have this on again, off again. Not on it. Let me try it again. We have this will they, won't they dynamic going on between the two main characters. We have Cormoran Strike and Robin Ellicott. And as this book series progresses, they've gone from basically being strangers to having a mutual admiration for each other, to becoming friends, to eventually becoming partners. And all that really does is raise the stakes. And again, we'll get the stakes in a minute. But they're constantly missing each other, right? We'll have one of them going, you know, he notices the other one and goes, but no, we're just friends. We couldn't possibly do that. That can't be right. And then the other one's like, oh, so-and-so looked at me. I wonder does he actually like me now? And then towards the end of the book, it's like, well, he's not making a move, so I guess he didn't like me. I'm going to go date this other person. And then the first person's like, oh my God, I just realized I like this person. I'm going to go ask her. Oh, she's with somebody else now, right? So they're tripping over their own feet. And that is, again, another source of conflict where, you know, the person's got to get over their own hang-ups, right? Indiana Jones has a fear of snakes. And that usually plays for a very minor conflict, but in Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's a huge section where it's like, okay, I have a goal. What's in my way? My worst fear. A whole room of snakes. How do I deal with this? That's conflict. So I've talked about it a little bit. One of the things about conflict is you need stakes. Let's go back to the Cormoran Strike books. Which, by the way, I think BBC made it into a TV series. Somebody made it into a TV series because I've watched them. The first several books are actually limited series TV watching on... I watch them on Max, on HBO Max. So... you can check that out, or you can read the books, which are way better. But the show's pretty good too. As these two characters evolve their friendship, they also are evolving their professional relationship. So one of the things that's getting in the way of their potential romantic relationship is a professional one. Because at first, Strike is like, okay, she's an employee. I can't date an employee. That's not right. Then later it's like, well, she's a really good friend. She's my best friend. I don't want to screw that up. If I try to have a one night stand with my best friend, we're not going to be best friends anymore. So no. You know, I want more than a one night stand. I actually really like her. But we're friends, and I really respect that relationship. Later, they become business partners. And so it's like, now it's not only are they risking ruining their friendship, they're risking ruining their business. So it's putting more and more stakes on this will they, won't they, because the cost of failure is becoming higher and higher. The big problem with stakes is, no, let me rephrase that. The big problem you have with the big problem you have with conflict is what happens when you resolve the conflict. Now, if you're writing a single novel like The Martian, the answer is simple. The book is done. Conflict solved, everybody goes home, the end. Easy peasy. If you're writing a series, that can get a little more complicated. If the conflict is resolved, you need another conflict. This is why, for example, a lot of romantic conflicts in TV shows don't ever get resolved. Because once you resolve it, there's no conflict. Very rarely can a TV show pivot to a new conflict and just keep on rolling. It happens occasionally. Some shows found good ways to do that. Wings had a very good success with this, where they had this one couple, and they were very will they, won't they. That conflict went on for about half the show's run. Then eventually they got together, and a lot of people are like, well, this is going to be the death of the show, right? This is one of the main conflicts. They get married, but instead it starts pivoting to them being the conflicts they have being a married couple, right? So they came up with new conflicts. Then they had the brother and the sister of the main couple. They started having a will they, won't they. So now we have the same conflict, but with a new set of people. And again, usually that kind of pivot doesn't work, but with Wings, they navigated that pretty well. And the show went on for many, many more seasons before it finally ended its run. As a counterexample, let's look at Stargate. Okay? The main conflict is the Goa'uld, right? Those are the big alien baddies in the show. At one point, they wrapped up the series. The Goa'uld was basically defeated in the story. But somebody decided, hey, we want to buy the series. It's very, very popular. We need more shows. And they're like, okay, great, more shows. But you lost your main character, and the main baddies are gone. They hire a new main character. New guy's going to take over the team. Okay, well, the Goa'uld are gone. Okay, let's get a MacGuffin that introduces a new baddie. And we wind up with the Ori, which was a very different enemy than the Goa'uld were. Now, did that work? I don't know. I'll leave that open to interpretation. But it was a very hard pivot, right? You can see really a dividing line between this part of Stargate and this part of Stargate. Denim, shut up! I hate my life. So when you're dealing with conflict, if you have an ongoing series, or if you have, like, for example, one series of books that I've read is Critical Failures. The main plot of that is a bunch of D&D players actually get zapped into a real D&D world as their characters. And the main conflict of the story is, how did they get back? How did they get back to the real world? So That's the main overall conflict. You've got to be kidding me. For example, one series that I've read and been reading is Critical Failures. It's a humorous story about a bunch of D&D players that get zapped into a living D&D world as their characters, and the main conflict is they're trying to find the main bad guy so they can get back. Get him! Take 3. One example of dealing with conflict in the series is one series I've read is Critical Failures. It's a humorous story about a bunch of D&D players that get zapped into a real D&D world, and they have to find the evil dungeon master dude that zapped them in here so they can get back. So that overall conflict, last time I read, was never resolved. Now, as these stories progress, they add more and more conflicts. This person gets cursed, and now he's got to deal with this. These people get separated. These people get captured. And so every book, there's more conflicts that have to be resolved. They find out that the bad guy has actually split himself, aka Voldemort style. So now they have to find multiple versions of him, which again spreads out the conflict. But overall, it's like when they find all these versions of him, what did they do? I mean, that was part of the problem, was they found one of them. Okay, well, story's over, right? Well, no, he's got to keep this thing going. So what does he do? Oh, it turns out that's one of multiple versions. Because he split him up to multiple. So we got to get all of them, so we can get all the magic dice, so we can bring everything together. There's a really good cartoon series when I was a kid in the 80s called The Pirates of Darkwater. And the goal was to get the 13 treasures of Rue, right? And that would stop the dark water from taking over the planet. And when season 1 ended, they only found about half of them, and they saw what it was doing. So again, it was canceled after one season, but second season supposedly would have been finding the second half. Then what do you do? Right? So you need to continue. If you want to continue the series, you got to continue the conflict in a way that makes sense. And a lot of times, that can get kind of hard. So, as a writer standpoint, generally speaking, conflict is over, the book is over, and you're done. Then you do the next book. New conflict, new story. It's probably the best approach, myself. I need to start wrapping this up because the dog won't stop barking and interrupting my recording. So let's go on to this week's showcase. I found this on some TikTok post, and I'm like, okay, this is definitely indie. This is definitely a curious book. Let's give this a shot. This is part of the I Found series. And this is I Found Puppets Living in My Apartment Walls by Ben Farthing. Now, this was a very short book. In fact, this was, I think, technically a novella. Right? I mean, I think the audiobook was only about 5 or 6 hours. It was a quick read, which, again, I appreciate because I got to get through so many books for the podcast. Our main characters are at their grandpa's apartment. And their apartment is a converted movie studio. Grandpa used to work on a Sesame Street-like show, and he's disappeared for a year. And then the instigating incident is one of the puppets from the show crawling around his room and disappeared into the walls. So they go to investigate. I found the book very, very interesting. Again, it was nice and crisp and short. Not a lot of wasted time. The only part of it that I didn't really like was he starts off going like, oh, does that thing that I have night terrors? It just sort of explains that he has night terrors, and then like, oh no, that was really a puppet, and it goes away. I mean, it was kind of a real kind of thing. That was the only rough part to the book. Once we got past that, everything was fine. Night terrors weren't mentioned again. And again, you could use night terrors, that's fine. But it just seemed like such a throwaway thing. Like, I'm going to put this in here to see if I'm going to question whether I saw it was real. But that only lasted for like a couple chapters. Then everybody realized that something real was going on. It seemed a little unnecessary. Because once we got past that, we didn't deal with night terrors ever again. And we just dealt with going through the maze in the walls. Then we find that a copy of the movie studio is underneath the apartment complex, and then there's another, and they're just nested in what's seemingly an endless loop. And it gets more and more involved in this weird puppet apocalypse that's coming on. I found the book fascinating. It was a really entertaining read, especially on a long car ride. It was just long enough to cover the car ride. So, from going from Orange County up to Placerville. So it was a perfect fit for that trip. And, this was a good horror book. I really enjoyed this. I would really recommend I Found Puppets Living in My Apartment Walls by Ben Farthing. I think it's a good, solid novella. So definitely check it out, especially if you have a fear of puppets, because the author wrote this thing, kind of an author's note at the end. He really does not like puppets. He's got a phobia or something about puppets. So that's probably why this book came out so well, because he wasn't just talking about evil puppets. He's talking about his childhood fears as he's writing this book. Oh my God, what if Grover's going to come eat me? So this was, again, a really good book, short read, and I highly recommend it. So that's this week's podcast. Next week we're planning on doing something special. What will probably happen is we will probably not have a podcast next week. What I'm going to do is I'm going to record the podcast, but I will probably not have time to edit it or post it until the next week. And that week is going to be WonderCon, where I wouldn't be doing a podcast anyway. So we're skipping a week regardless. It's just, instead of skipping the week of WonderCon, we're going to skip the week before, because I'm going to record this very special event. So you want to tune in 2 weeks from now and check this out, because this is going to be awesome if everything goes according to plan, which would be a pleasant surprise. That'd be a nice change of pace. So tune in. Nice big event. Fingers crossed. Wish me luck. Until then, folks, keep on reading.